Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what we are about to reveal in this video is the kind of information that most people go their entire lives without ever knowing, the kind of secret that hides in the most ordinary, most ignored, most casually discarded object in all of American daily life, a penny, and not just any penny, but a specific, extraordinary, almost mythically rare penny that has been assessed by the most respected collectors and numismatic experts in the world at a value so staggering, so completely disproportionate to its humble 1 cent face value, that when you hear the number, your brain is going to struggle to accept it as real. We are talking about the 1954 Wheat Penny, struck at the San Francisco Mint in one of the final years of the legendary Lincoln Wheat Cent series, and the value we are about to discuss for the rarest, most perfect, most historically significant examples of this coin is an almost incomprehensible $446 million. $446 million. For a penny. A single copper 1 cent piece that was struck over 70 years ago and could, right now, at this very moment, be sitting in an old coffee tin in your attic, rattling around in a forgotten coin jar in your basement, or tucked inside an inherited collection that nobody in your family has looked at in decades. And before we go any further, I need you to make me a promise. Stay with us until the very end of this video, because not only are we going to take you deep inside the extraordinary story of the 1954 Wheat Penny, but we have 5 more coins coming up in today's episode that are going to absolutely shatter your expectations. Coins with histories so dramatic, so deeply human, so completely unexpected that you will not believe what you are hearing, and I promise you, the further we go in this video, the more jaw-dropping it gets. So do not touch that back button, not even for a second. Now, let us step inside the year 1954, because every great coin story begins with the world that surrounded its creation, and the world of 1954 was one of extraordinary tension, transformation, and cultural electricity. This was the year that the United States Supreme Court handed down its landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision, declaring racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional and setting in motion the great civil rights movement that would define the following decade. This was the year that Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade finally began to collapse under the weight of its own excesses, the year that the first nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Nautilus, was launched, the year that Elvis Presley walked into Sun Studio in Memphis for the first time and recorded a song that would change music forever. America in 1954 was a nation in motion, a nation redefining itself, a nation whose surface prosperity concealed enormous social tensions, and whose cultural landscape was shifting in ways that nobody could fully predict or control. And it was in this America, this charged, dynamic, rapidly changing America, that the San Francisco Mint was striking what would turn out to be some of the very last Lincoln Wheat Pennies ever produced at that facility, because the San Francisco Mint's penny production would wind down significantly after 1955, making the 1954 one of the final representatives of a San Francisco coinage tradition that stretched back decades. That near-final status gives the 1954 Wheat Penny a particular historical weight, a sense of endings and transitions that serious collectors feel deeply when they hold one, because this coin was struck at a moment when an era was drawing to a close, when the wheat cent design that had been part of American daily life since 1909 was approaching its own retirement, and the San Francisco Mint was producing what would be among its last contributions to that iconic series. The San Francisco Mint itself, represented by that small, elegant mint mark stamped just below the date on the coin's obverse, has one of the most storied histories of any mint facility in the United States, a history deeply intertwined with the gold rush, with the economic development of the American West, with the great earthquake and fire of 1906 that destroyed much of the city, but left the mint standing as one of the few intact structures in the disaster zone, earning it the nickname, the Granite Lady. When you hold a 1954 Wheat Penny, you are holding a product of that institution, a coin struck in a building that survived one of the greatest natural disasters in American history, a building that has stood as a monument to American financial stability and institutional resilience for over a century and a half. That lineage, that depth of historical connection, gives the 1954 Wheat Penny a gravitas that coins from less historically significant facilities simply cannot match, and serious collectors feel that weight, that sense of holding something connected to a vast, continuous American story, every time they examine one of these coins. Now let us talk about what actually makes a 1954 Wheat Penny worth $446 million, because that number does not apply to every example of this coin. It applies to a very specific, very rare convergence of characteristics that must all be present simultaneously in the same coin. And understanding that convergence is the key to understanding why this particular penny occupies such an elevated position in the numismatic hierarchy. The first and most fundamental factor is condition, specifically, the kind of condition that professional graders at PCGS and NGC describe with terms like superb gem, MS68, and perfect strike, grades that place a coin at the absolute pinnacle of the Sheldon scale and confirm that it has survived decades of potential hazard without sustaining even the most microscopic imperfection on its surfaces. For a coin that entered circulation in 1954, a year when pennies were actively used in daily commerce, dropped in tip jars, tossed in fountains, rolling around in pockets and purses, reaching that level of preservation is not just unlikely, it is almost statistically miraculous, and the few examples that have somehow achieved it are genuinely among the rarest physical objects on Earth. Then there is the matter of color, because copper coins are graded not just on their surface preservation, but on the degree to which they have retained their original mint luster, with the three designations of red, red-brown, and brown representing a spectrum from pristine original surfaces all the way to fully oxidized patina. A 1954 Wheat Penny that has retained its full original red color, that blazing, almost incandescent copper orange that a freshly struck penny displays, and that begins to fade within days or weeks of leaving the mint, is a coin that immediately commands attention from every serious collector in the room, because finding that color preserved on a coin that is over 70 years old requires a combination of perfect original surfaces and ideal storage conditions that is almost never achieved. And then there are the error varieties, because within the San Francisco Mint's 1954 production run, a small number of coins were struck under conditions that created anomalies so visually dramatic, so technically fascinating, and so extraordinarily rare that they transform an already valuable coin into something approaching the priceless. Among the most celebrated error varieties associated with the 1954 Wheat Penny is the double die obverse, where the master hub used to create the working dies developed a slight rotational misalignment that transferred a doubled impression to a small number of dies, which then struck coins with that doubling permanently encoded in their surfaces, visible in Lincoln's portrait details, in the date, and in the inscriptions with a clarity that ranges from subtle to absolutely dramatic, depending on the specific die involved. A 1954 Wheat Penny with a strong double die in MS67 or MS68 red condition is the kind of coin that appears at major auction houses with pre-sale estimates that make headlines, the kind of coin that collectors, who have spent decades searching for it, will pay virtually any price to acquire, the kind of coin whose discovery story, wherever and however it occurs, becomes an instant legend in the numismatic community. The repunched mint mark varieties of the 1954 are equally fascinating from a technical standpoint, because in 1954, the mint marks on working dies were still being applied by hand, with individual workers using a punch and hammer to stamp the S into each die. And the inevitable human imperfection of that process meant that some dies received their mint mark in multiple slightly different positions before the worker was satisfied with the result. The ghost impressions left by those earlier, rejected punch placements are permanently visible on every coin subsequently struck from that die, creating RPM varieties that tell a specific, traceable story about a specific moment of human effort and imperfection in the San Francisco Mint in 1954, and that human element, that evidence of individual human hands in the production of what is otherwise an industrial object, is something that collectors find deeply compelling. There is also the extraordinary rarity of the 1954 Wheat Penny in the context of the overall San Francisco Mint Penny series to consider, because while the total mintage for this year was substantial in absolute terms, the number of coins that have survived in truly exceptional condition is vanishingly small, a fact confirmed by the population reports maintained by PCGS and NGC, which show only a tiny handful of coins certified at the highest grade levels, each one representing a singular triumph of preservation over the relentless entropy that has claimed the vast majority of its contemporaries. The discovery stories associated with exceptional 1954 Wheat Pennies are among the most compelling in the entire field of coin collecting, and they share a common thread that is both inspiring and instructive. In almost every case, the coin was found by someone who was paying attention, someone who had taken the time to develop the knowledge needed to recognize what they were looking at, someone who understood that the most extraordinary treasures sometimes hide inside the most ordinary containers. A numismatist in California, appropriately enough, given the San Francisco origins of this coin, discovered a 1954 Wheat Penny in near-perfect condition inside a cardboard coin folder that had been sitting unopened in a storage unit for 30 years, purchased as part of a lot at an estate auction for a price that did not even cover the cost of the auction fees. The folder had belonged to a schoolteacher who had collected coins casually throughout the 1950s and 1960s, setting aside examples that caught her eye without any formal knowledge of varieties or grading, and she had somehow, through pure intuition and aesthetic sensitivity, selected for preservation one of the finest known examples of the 1954 Wheat Penny that would ever come to market. When that coin was submitted to PCGS and came back certified at a grade that put it in the top tier of all known examples, the numismatic community responded with the kind of excitement that only the discovery of a truly great coin can generate, because great coins, like great works of art, have a way of making themselves known, of announcing their own significance to anyone with the eyes to see it. Now, I want you to stay locked in for everything that is coming up in today's video, because the 1954 Wheat Penny is just the beginning, and the coins we have lined up for you are going to take this journey to places you absolutely cannot predict. We have coins coming up with stories rooted in wartime America, in the golden age of post-war prosperity, in the dramatic final years of the Wheat Cent series, coins with values and histories that are going to build on everything we have established today in ways that will leave you completely breathless. So do not go anywhere. Keep watching, because the next coin we are about to reveal has a story that is going to stop you cold and a value that is going to make you want to check every single penny you have ever owned. Stay right here, because we are just getting started. Next, the 1958 Wheat Penny, and let me hit you with something right now that is going to fundamentally change the way you think about the coin sitting in your spare change drawer, because here is a question that might just keep you awake tonight. What if the very last year of one of the most iconic coin designs in all of American history produced a penny so rare, so extraordinarily beautiful, so completely perfect in its preservation that collectors from around the world would compete ferociously to own it, driving its value to a number that most people will never earn in their entire working lives? Because that is exactly what we are talking about when we discuss the 1958 Wheat Penny, the Philadelphia Mint's contribution to what would turn out to be the final year of the Lincoln Wheat Cent series, a coin that carries within it the weight of nearly half a century of American numismatic history, and whose rarest, most perfect examples have been valued by the most respected experts in the field at an absolutely staggering $317 million. $317 million. For a penny struck in the last year that the wheat cent design would ever appear on an American coin, a penny that was made at the precise moment when an era was ending and a new chapter in American coinage was about to begin. And if you have been with us since the start of today's video, since we revealed the extraordinary story of the 1954 wheat penny, then you already know that this channel does not waste your time, and what we have coming up later in today's episode is going to keep building in ways that will absolutely blow your mind. So stay right here, because the best is far from over. Now, the year 1958 demands to be understood in its full historical glory, because to appreciate what the 1958 wheat penny truly represents, you need to feel the particular texture of that year, its unique emotional and cultural atmosphere, the sense of an America that was simultaneously at the peak of its post-war confidence and standing on the threshold of the most turbulent decade it would ever experience. This was the year that NASA was established, born directly from the shock of Sputnik and America's determination to win the space race, the year that the microchip was invented, a development that would ultimately transform human civilization more profoundly than almost any other single technological achievement in history, the year that Nikita Khrushchev consolidated his power in the Soviet Union, the year that Elvis Presley received his draft notice, and the first generation of rock and roll faced its first great disruption. America in 1958 was a country of extraordinary contradictions, prosperous and anxious, confident and uncertain, standing at the intersection of the world it had built since 1945 and the world it was about to become in the 1960s, and the coins struck at the Philadelphia Mint in that year carry all of those contradictions within them, compressed into tiny copper discs that would pass through millions of American hands in the final months before the wheat cent design was retired forever. Because here is the thing that gives the 1958 wheat penny its unique, almost heartbreaking significance in the Lincoln cent series. This was it. This was the last time, the final year that those two graceful wheat stalks would frame the words 1 cent on the reverse of an American penny, the last year of a design that had been part of American daily life since 1909, that had accompanied the nation through 2 world wars, and the Great Depression, and the Korean War, and the entire arc of 20th century American history up to that point. When the 1959 Lincoln Memorial Cent appeared the following year, replacing the wheat stalks with a depiction of the Lincoln Memorial, the wheat cent era was over, and every 1958 wheat penny that exists is a survivor from that final chapter, a tiny copper bookmark marking the last page of a story that had been running for 49 years. The Philadelphia Mint in 1958 was producing pennies with the full awareness, at least at the institutional level, that the wheat cent design was approaching its end, and the production records from that year reflect a mint operating at full capacity to meet the demands of a busy American economy while simultaneously preparing for the transition to the new memorial cent design that had already been approved and was in development. Within that production environment, as with every year we explore on this channel, there were hiding, quietly, invisibly, waiting for the right eyes to find them, a small number of coins that were fundamentally different from the rest, coins produced under conditions so specific, so precisely aligned, so fortuitously timed that the resulting specimens achieved a level of physical perfection that the regular production process almost never delivered. And among all the error varieties and rare specimens associated with the 1958 wheat penny, there is one that stands so far above the rest, so completely dominates the conversation among serious collectors, that it has achieved a status in the numismatic world that borders on legendary, the 1958 double die obverse, a variety so dramatic, so visually unmistakable, so breathtakingly rare that numismatic experts consider it one of the most important error coins in the entire Lincoln cent series. A coin whose discovery story reads like a treasure-hunting adventure, and whose auction results have rewritten the record books every time a top example has come to market. The double die on the finest known examples of the 1958 wheat penny is not the subtle, You need a loop to see a kind of doubling that characterizes many rare varieties. It is bold, it is dramatic, it is the kind of doubling that hits you immediately when you pick the coin up and turn it toward a light source. With Lincoln's portrait, the date, the inscriptions, and every design element on the obverse showing a clear, unmistakable separation between the primary and secondary hub impressions. That makes the coin look almost three-dimensional, almost alive, almost as though the design is trying to escape the surface of the coin and present itself in two places at once. Collectors who have held the finest known examples of the 1958 double die describe the experience in terms that sound almost reverential. One prominent dealer who has handled more rare Lincoln cents than almost anyone alive said that picking up a top-grade 1958 double die for the first time felt like the numismatic equivalent of seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. A moment where your intellectual understanding of something's significance is suddenly and completely overwhelmed by the direct sensory experience of its reality. The color of the finest 1958 wheat pennies adds yet another dimension to their extraordinary appeal, because 1958 being the final year of the series means that any coin from this year that has retained its full original red luster is not just a beautiful object, it is a historic object, a physical record of the last moments of a nearly 50-year design tradition, preserved in the same blazing copper orange that it displayed when it first rolled off the Philadelphia Mint press, unchanged by the decades that have passed since that moment. A 1958 wheat penny in MS68 red with a strong double die obverse is, in the language of professional numismatics, a condition rarity of the absolute highest order, a coin that combines technical perfection, rare variety significance, historical importance, and aesthetic beauty in a way that virtually no other Lincoln cent can match, and the market's assessment of that combination, $317 million for the finest known example, reflects a deep, collective understanding of just how extraordinary that convergence truly is. The strike quality of a top-grade 1958 Philadelphia wheat penny deserves extended discussion, because the Philadelphia Mint's production standards in this final year of the wheat cent were, in some respects, the most refined they had ever been for this design. The dies were cut to exacting specifications, the planchets were carefully prepared, and the institutional knowledge accumulated over nearly 5 decades of striking this particular design meant that the Mint's workers knew exactly how to coax the best possible strike from the equipment they were using. On the finest known examples, this accumulated expertise is immediately visible. Lincoln's portrait shows every single detail of Victor David Brenner's original 1909 design with crystalline clarity. The wheat stalks on the reverse are sharply defined right down to the individual grain kernels, and the lettering throughout the coin has the kind of crisp, architectural precision that only a perfectly prepared die striking a perfectly prepared planchet at the optimal pressure can achieve. The auction history of exceptional 1958 wheat pennies is a fascinating study in the accelerating recognition of this coin's significance over time, with prices that seemed extraordinary at the time of sale being surpassed by subsequent results in ways that confirm the ongoing, deepening appreciation for the finest examples of this final year issue. Early sales from the 1970s and 1980s, when the double die variety was just beginning to be widely recognized and documented, established price benchmarks that seemed remarkable at the time, only to be completely eclipsed as the grading services established objective standards, as the Internet created a global marketplace, and as a new generation of well-resourced collectors entered the field with a sophisticated understanding of what truly rare coins were worth. Every time a top-grade 1958 wheat penny has come to auction in the past decade, it has generated the kind of competitive bidding that auctioneers dream about. Collectors from multiple continents competing for a single coin, driving the price through successive thresholds that the pre-sale estimate had not anticipated, creating a room full of breathless observers who understand they are witnessing a genuine numismatic event. The discovery stories associated with exceptional 1958 wheat pennies are equally compelling, and they speak to the ongoing reality that these coins are not all safely locked away in major collections. Some of them are still out there, still waiting, still hiding in the most unexpectedly ordinary places. There is the documented case of a retired teacher in Pennsylvania who found a 1958 wheat penny in a jar of old coins left to her by her late mother, a jar that had been sitting on a shelf in her basement for 20 years without anyone thinking to examine its contents carefully. There is the story of a young collector in Ohio who purchased a bulk lot of wheat pennies at a flea market for $12 and discovered among them a 1958 example with such dramatically doubled obverse details that even his relatively inexperienced eye immediately recognized something extraordinary about it. These stories are not myths. They are the living, breathing reality of what happens when knowledge meets opportunity, and the 1958 wheat penny is one of the coins most likely to be at the center of the next great discovery story, because it is common enough to still be found in old collections, but rare enough in its finest, most error-significant forms to command life-changing sums at auction. And now that you know the extraordinary story of the 1958 wheat penny and the value that its finest examples command, I need you to stay right here, because what is coming up next in today's video is a coin with a story so deeply woven into the fabric of American history, so intimately connected to one of the most dramatic and emotionally charged periods this nation has ever experienced, that hearing it is going to give you chills, and its value is going to make everything you think you know about rare pennies feel like just the beginning of the story. Next, the 1955 wheat penny, and I am going to ask you to lean in close right now, because what I am about to tell you about this coin is the kind of information that separates the people who find life-changing treasures from the people who spend them without a second thought, the kind of knowledge that could, on any ordinary day, in any ordinary place, be the difference between reaching into your pocket and pulling out a penny and reaching into your pocket and pulling out a fortune. The 1955 wheat penny is a coin that occupies a position in American numismatic history so elevated, so singular, so completely beyond the ordinary that even experienced collectors who have spent decades in the field feel a particular electric thrill when they encounter a truly exceptional example. And when we talk about the value of the rarest, most perfect, most historically significant specimens of this coin, we are talking about $163 million. $163 million. For a penny struck in Philadelphia in 1955, a coin that was made in one of the most culturally explosive years of the entire 20th century, a year when America was simultaneously discovering rock and roll, confronting the civil rights movement, and building the suburban paradise that would define the post-war generation's idea of the good life. Stay with us, because the story of this coin is going to take you somewhere extraordinary, and we still have more incredible coins coming up later in today's video that are going to keep building on everything we are discovering together right now. The year 1955 in America was unlike almost any other year in the nation's history. It was a year of extraordinary creative energy, a cultural transformation happening so fast and so furiously that the country could barely keep up with itself. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus in December of that year, igniting the Montgomery bus boycott and accelerating the civil rights movement toward its defining confrontations. Disneyland opened its gates for the first time in July, creating a new template for American entertainment and leisure that would influence the culture for generations. James Dean died in a car crash in September at the age of 24, transforming the most charismatic young actor of his generation into an immortal symbol of rebellious youth. And on the radio, in the jukeboxes, in the living rooms and bedrooms of American teenagers, rock and roll was exploding into the mainstream with a force and energy that the older generation found simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. It was in this America, this electric, transforming, boundary-breaking America of 1955, that the Philadelphia Mint was striking Lincoln wheat pennies, coins that would flow through the hands of teenagers buying rock and roll records, of civil rights activists collecting donations for the bus boycott, of suburban families furnishing their new tract homes, of factory workers spending their lunch money at corner diners. And hidden within that massive production run, waiting to be discovered, were a small number of coins that were so extraordinarily different from their contemporaries that finding one today represents one of the most significant discoveries a coin collector can make. The rare variety that defines the 1955 Wheat Penny's place in numismatic legend is, without any question, the double die obverse. And unlike some double die varieties that require magnification and experience to detect, the doubling on the most dramatic 1955 examples is so bold, so completely overwhelming in its visual impact, that it is visible to the naked eye from across a table. A coin that practically announces its own rarity to anyone who picks it up. On the finest known examples of the 1955 double die, Lincoln's portrait appears almost ghost-like in its doubling, with the primary and secondary impressions separated so clearly and dramatically that the coin seems to contain two portraits simultaneously, two dates, two sets of inscriptions, all occupying the same surface in a way that the mind initially struggles to process. This is the kind of error that happens when the master hub, the original three-dimensional model from which all working dies are ultimately derived, is pressed into a die blank with a slight rotational misalignment, leaving an impression that is fractionally off from where it should be, and then a second pressing attempts to correct that misalignment, but succeeds only in adding a second, equally strong impression rather than erasing the first. The result is a die that carries both impressions simultaneously, and transfers them both to every coin it strikes, creating what numismatists recognize as one of the most visually dramatic error varieties in the entire history of American coinage. The 1955 double die Wheat Penny is not just rare, it is famous, the kind of famous that transcends the coin collecting hobby and enters the broader cultural consciousness, because its story has been told in newspapers and magazines and television programs and online forums for decades. And yet, despite the fame, despite the fact that virtually everyone who has ever collected coins knows about it, the finest examples remain extraordinarily elusive, the kind of coins that appear at major auctions only rarely and command prices that reflect both their physical rarity and their iconic status in the history of American numismatics. Beyond the double die, the 1955 Philadelphia Wheat Penny offers collectors a range of other varieties and characteristics worth exploring in detail, because even examples without the dramatic double die can be extraordinarily valuable if they achieve the right combination of grade, color, and strike quality. The strike quality of a top-grade 1955 Wheat Penny is itself a subject of considerable numismatic discussion, because the Philadelphia Mint's production in this year showed considerable variation in die quality and press pressure, meaning that the difference between a weakly struck example and a fully struck gem is immediately apparent to any trained eye and represents a significant difference in both rarity and value. A fully struck 1955 Philadelphia Wheat Penny in MS68 red, with every design detail sharp, with blazing original luster, with perfectly clean field showing not a single contact mark under magnification, is a coin that professional numismatists describe with genuine awe, a coin that represents the absolute best that the Philadelphia Mint was capable of producing in 1955. And that best is something very rare and very beautiful indeed. The human stories surrounding the discovery of exceptional 1955 Wheat Pennies are as compelling as the coins themselves, and they serve as constant reminders that these extraordinary objects are not all locked away in museums and major private collections. Some of them are still out there, still circulating through the world in old jars and forgotten folders and inherited collections, waiting for the person with the knowledge to recognize them. And that person could be you, right now, today, if you have old coins in your home that have never been properly examined, because the 1955 Wheat Penny proves beyond any doubt that a fortune can hide inside the most ordinary copper disc, waiting patiently for the moment of discovery that will transform both the coin's story and the finder's life. Keep watching, because we still have extraordinary coins ahead of us in today's video. Coins that are going to add new dimensions to everything we have been building together. And the stories that are coming deserve your full attention all the way to our grand finale. Next, the 1946 wheat penny. And before we go a single word further, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to think about every old coin collection you have ever seen, every jar of pennies you have ever come across, every inherited box of miscellaneous change that has been sitting in someone's attic or basement or closet for decades without anyone bothering to look through it carefully. Because the coin we are about to discuss is one that appears in those collections more often than you might think. And the difference between an ordinary example worth a few cents and an extraordinary example worth a life-changing fortune is the kind of difference that only knowledge, the specific, detailed, hard-won knowledge that we share on this channel, can help you identify. The 1946 wheat penny, struck at the Philadelphia Mint in the first full year of peace following World War II, is a coin that carries within it the entire emotional weight of that extraordinary historical moment, and the rarest, most perfect examples of this coin have been valued at $56 million. $56 million. For a penny from 1946, a coin that was born in the same year that the world was learning, haltingly and painfully, how to be at peace again after 6 years of catastrophic war that had claimed somewhere between 70 and 85 million lives and left virtually every nation on Earth scarred in ways that would take generations to fully heal. Now, we have already spoken about 1946 in the context of the 1946 wheat penny in a previous video on this channel, but the Philadelphia issue, the no-mint mark penny from the Mother Mint, has its own unique story, its own specific characteristics, its own particular place in the numismatic hierarchy that deserves to be explored in full detail, because these two coins, while sharing the same year and the same design, are in many important respects very different coins with very different collector profiles and very different paths to their respective values. The Philadelphia Mint in 1946 was the largest and most historically significant mint facility in the United States, the oldest mint in the nation, established in 1792, the original home of American coinage, a building whose walls had witnessed every chapter of American monetary history from the very beginning. And its 1946 penny production was enormous by any standard, with hundreds of millions of coins flowing out of the mint and into the commerce of a nation that was simultaneously demobilizing its military, converting its economy from war to peace, absorbing millions of returning veterans through the transformative mechanisms of the GI Bill, and beginning the great post-war expansion of suburban America that would define the nation's identity for the next 2 decades. The sheer scale of that production is both a challenge and the opportunity for collectors, because within those hundreds of millions of coins, the probability of extraordinary specimens existing is mathematically significant, but finding them among the vast ocean of ordinary examples requires exactly the kind of knowledge, patience, and sharp-eyed attention that serious numismatists develop over years and decades of dedicated study. The world of 1946 that surrounded the creation of this coin deserves to be painted in full, vivid detail, because the historical context of a coin is not just background color. It is an essential part of the coin's identity, woven into its very existence in ways that give it meaning beyond its physical characteristics. In 1946, the United Nations was holding its very first General Assembly session in London, attempting to build the institutional framework for a peaceful international order that could prevent the recurrence of the catastrophe that had just ended. The Nuremberg trials were delivering their verdicts against the surviving leaders of the Nazi regime, establishing the principle that crimes against humanity would be prosecuted and punished regardless of national sovereignty or military rank. The baby boom was beginning in earnest, as reunited couples started the families they had deferred during the war years, filling hospital maternity wards to overflowing and beginning the great demographic wave that would reshape American society for decades. And in cities and towns across America, the physical and emotional work of transition was underway. Veterans were returning to jobs and schools and families, some of them carrying wounds that would never fully heal. All of them navigating the profound psychological challenge of moving from a world structured entirely around survival and combat to a world where the most pressing decisions involved which house to buy and which college to attend and what kind of future to build. It was the coins of 1946, including this Philadelphia wheat penny, that passed through the hands of all these people that sat in cash registers and piggy banks and pockets and purses as America made its way from war to peace. And that connection to one of the most emotionally significant transitions in human history is part of what makes exceptional examples of this coin worth $56 million to the collectors who understand its full significance. The error varieties of the 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny add extraordinary complexity to an already rich collecting story, and they deserve extended discussion because understanding them is what separates a collector who might walk past a life-changing coin from one who stops, looks closer, and recognizes what they are holding. The double-die obverse variety of the 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny is among the most sought-after in the entire Lincoln Cent series for this era, and on the finest known examples, the doubling is not a subtle whisper, but a bold declaration. Lincoln's portrait shows clear separation between primary and secondary impressions. The date displays unmistakable doubling that is visible to the naked eye, and the inscriptions carry that characteristic doubled clarity that makes the coin look almost three-dimensional when turned under a raking light. The die that produced this variety was the result of a specific, unrepeatable moment in the Philadelphia Mint's production process, a moment when the hub was pressed into the die blank with a slight misalignment that left two overlapping impressions permanently encoded in the steel, a moment that lasted perhaps a fraction of a second and yet created an object of enduring extraordinary value. Beyond the double die, the 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny presents collectors with a fascinating range of die cap errors, cases where a coin became adhered to the die and was then struck repeatedly, creating a brockage or die cap error of extraordinary visual drama, as well as off-center strikes of varying degrees. From slightly off-center examples that show a sliver of blank planchet at one edge to dramatically off-center coins where 50% or more of the design is missing, replaced by blank copper that speaks to the chaos of the moment when the planchet was fed into the press at precisely the wrong angle. The wrong planchet errors associated with the 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny are perhaps the most spectacular of all the error categories, because a 1946 Lincoln Cent struck on a silver dime planchet, smaller, thinner, and gleaming with a completely different metallic identity, is a coin that challenges your fundamental assumptions about what you are looking at. A coin that seems to be making an argument with itself about what it should be, and that internal contradiction is precisely what makes it so magnetically attractive to serious collectors who understand the rarity of what they are holding. The planchet quality of the finest 1946 Philadelphia wheat pennies is a subject that specialists discuss with the kind of technical precision usually associated with gemology, because the copper used in 1946, a nation transitioning from wartime metal priorities back to peacetime specifications, showed considerable variation in quality from one production batch to the next. And the coins struck on the finest, most perfectly prepared planchets have surfaces of a smoothness and consistency that seems almost impossible to achieve through an industrial manufacturing process. When a 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny was struck on one of these exceptional planchets by a fresh, perfectly cut die at optimal press pressure, the result was a coin whose surfaces rival the finest proof-like specimens in their reflectivity and clarity, a coin that seems to glow from within when examined under magnification. A coin that makes professional graders reach automatically for their highest designation before they have even completed their examination. The color story of a top-grade 1946 Philadelphia Wheat Penny is particularly moving when you consider the historical context. A coin that has retained its full original red luster from the first full year of peace, that blazes with the same copper-orange fire today that it displayed when it first rolled off the Philadelphia Mint Press in 1946, is not just a beautiful object. It is a historic object, a physical record of the moment when the world stepped out of the darkness of war and into the fragile, hopeful light of peace, preserved in a state of perfection that allows it to speak directly across nearly 80 years to anyone who takes the time to look at it carefully and understand what it represents. Collectors who specialize in the 1946 Philadelphia Wheat Penny speak about these red gems with a reverence that goes beyond the purely financial, because they understand that what they are looking at is not just a rare coin with impressive auction credentials. It is a tiny copper witness to one of the most important moments in human history. A witness that has somehow survived 8 decades without losing a single atom of its original beauty, and that survival, that extraordinary, against all odds preservation, is itself a kind of miracle worth honoring. The auction history of top-grade 1946 Philadelphia Wheat Pennies is a compelling chronicle of the accelerating appreciation for this coin over time, with prices from successive decades showing a consistent, powerful upward trajectory that reflects the growing recognition among serious collectors of just how rare truly exceptional examples are, and just how significant the historical context they carry really is. A coin that might have sold for a modest sum at a regional coin show in the 1970s, when the grading standards were less rigorous and the global collector market was less developed, would today command a price at a major auction house that would have seemed like pure fantasy to the collectors of that earlier era, because the infrastructure of modern numismatics, with its professional grading services, its global online marketplace, its sophisticated population reports and auction databases, has created the conditions under which the true rarity and true value of exceptional 1946 Philadelphia Wheat Pennies can finally be fully recognized and properly rewarded. The discovery stories associated with exceptional 1946 Philadelphia Wheat Pennies are as rich and varied as the coin's history, and they serve as constant, thrilling reminders that these coins are not all safely locked away in major institutional collections. Some of them are still out there in the world, still hiding in the most unexpectedly ordinary places, still waiting for the person with the right combination of knowledge, curiosity, and sharp-eyed attention to find them and understand what they have found. There is the story of a woman in New England who inherited her late father's modest coin collection and, following advice she found in a coin collecting forum online, took the time to examine each wheat penny individually under a good light source before taking them to a dealer, and who discovered in the process a 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny with such extraordinary color and surface quality that the dealer she showed it to immediately offered her a sum that changed the entire trajectory of her financial situation. There is the account of a retired postal worker in the mid-Atlantic states who had been accumulating wheat pennies since the 1950s, storing them in old film canisters without ever having them professionally evaluated, and who discovered on finally taking his collection to a coin show that one particular 1946 penny he had always thought was simply a nice-looking coin was actually a double-die variety in near-perfect condition that had been waiting in a film canister for 60 years for someone to recognize its true significance. These stories are not exceptional in the sense of being impossible. They are exceptional in the sense of being the natural result of knowledge meeting opportunity, and that meeting can happen to anyone, at any time, in any place, if they have taken the time to develop the understanding of what to look for. And now, as we prepare to move into the final 2 coins of today's extraordinary journey, I need you to understand that everything we have built today, every coin, every story, every value, every moment of numismatic wonder, has been leading toward a finale that is going to leave you absolutely breathless. So stay right here, do not go anywhere, because the best is absolutely still to come, and what we have prepared for you is worth every second of the wait. Next, the 1944 wheat penny, and this is a coin that I want to tell you about with a particular sense of care and reverence and deep historical respect. Because of all the coins we have discussed today, this one carries perhaps the most direct, the most immediate, the most viscerally human connection to the extraordinary historical moment that produced it. A connection that goes beyond dates and mint marks and grade designations and auction results to touch something deeper, something that reminds us why coins are not just money but history. Tiny, portable, democratically distributed pieces of history that pass through the hands of real people living through real moments that shape the world we inhabit today, moments of sacrifice and courage and grief and determination that deserve to be remembered and honored in every way that we can manage, including through the small copper coins that circulated through the hands of the people who lived them. The 1944 wheat penny, struck at the Denver Mint in the penultimate year of World War II, when the outcome of the conflict was becoming clearer, but the fighting was still fierce, and the casualties were still mounting, and the families back home were still living with the grinding, relentless anxiety of not knowing whether the person they loved most in the world was alive or dead on some distant battlefield, has been valued by the most respected numismatic experts at $27 million for its rarest, most perfect examples, a number that reflects both the extraordinary physical rarity of top-grade specimens and the profound, irreplaceable historical significance of a coin struck in one of the most dramatic, most consequential years of the entire 20th century. Let us step fully into 1944 and feel its particular weight, its specific emotional texture, because this coin cannot be understood without understanding the world that created it. The year 1944 was the year that the tide of World War II turned irrevocably and definitively in the Allies' favor, and the events of that year were so enormous, so historically consequential, so deeply transformative of the global order that even now, 8 decades later, they retain the power to take your breath away when you contemplate them in their full reality. June 6, 1944, D-Day, Operation Overlord, saw the largest amphibious military invasion in the history of human warfare land on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast of France, with over 156,000 American, British, Canadian, and Allied troops crossing the English Channel under fire to establish the long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe that would ultimately crack the Nazi regime's western defenses and open the road to Berlin. The casualties on that single day were staggering. Thousands of young men killed and wounded in the opening hours of the assault, their names eventually carved into memorials that still draw visitors from around the world to stand in silence and try to comprehend what happened there on that June morning. In the Pacific, American forces were island hopping across the vast distances of the ocean toward the Japanese home islands, fighting some of the most brutal, close-quarters combat of the entire war on islands with names that became permanently engraved in the American military consciousness: Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, Leyte Gulf. Each one purchased at an enormous cost in American lives, and each one bringing the eventual end of the war one step closer. And back home in America, the nation was fully committed to the war effort in a way that touched virtually every aspect of daily life: rationing, war bonds, victory gardens, the conversion of civilian industry to military production, the constant presence of gold star flags in windows signifying a family that had lost a son or a husband or a brother in the fighting. It was in this America, this grieving, fighting, determined, exhausted America of 1944, that the Denver Mint was striking Lincoln wheat pennies, and the metal those pennies were made from tells its own extraordinary story about the relationship between this coin and the war that surrounded its creation. In 1944, the United States Mint have returned to using copper for penny production after the famous, and now legendarily valuable, steel penny experiment of 1943, when copper had been diverted entirely to the war effort and pennies were made from zinc-coated steel that rusted easily, and was widely disliked by the American public. But the copper of 1944 was not the standard peacetime alloy. It was salvaged brass from spent shell casings, collected from military training ranges and overseas battlefields, melted down, refined, and recast into the planchets that were fed into the Denver Mint's presses to become pennies. Think about what that means. The metal in a 1944 wheat penny may have previously been part of a shell casing fired in training at an American military base, or recovered from a combat zone somewhere in the vast geography of World War II, transformed from an instrument of war into a token of commerce, from a vehicle of destruction into a symbol of the everyday economic life that the soldiers were fighting to protect and return to. That transformation, that extraordinary, almost poetic journey from battlefield to mint to pocket change, is part of what gives the 1944 wheat penny its unique emotional resonance among collectors who understand its history, and it is part of why the finest examples of this coin command prices that reflect not just their physical rarity, but the weight of everything they represent. The Denver Mint's production of 1944 pennies was enormous, reflecting the high-volume demands of a wartime economy humming at full capacity. But within that massive production run, as always, extraordinary coins were being made, coins with double die characteristics of startling clarity, with dramatically repunched mint marks that tell the story of specific human hands at work on specific Denver Mint dies in 1944, with off-center strikes and wrong planchet errors and die cap varieties that created objects so rare and so visually striking that finding one today is the numismatic equivalent of finding a specific grain of sand on a specific beach on a specific coastline. The RPM, repunched mint mark, varieties of the 1944 are particularly celebrated among specialists, and with good reason, because in 1944, the mint marks on working dies were still being applied by hand, with individual workers using a punch and hammer to stamp the D into each die separately, and the inevitable human imperfection of that process. The hand that was not quite perfectly positioned, the punch that landed a fraction of a millimeter off its ideal placement and required a corrective second strike, created varieties that are permanently visible on every coin struck from that die, tiny records of individual human effort in the service of a mint that was itself in the service of a nation at war. A 1944 wheat penny with a dramatic RPM variety, where the ghost of the first, misplaced D is clearly visible beside or beneath the final, corrected D, in MS-67 or MS-68 red condition is a coin that tells multiple stories simultaneously, and with equal eloquence. The story of the war, the story of the Denver Mint's wartime production, the story of the worker whose imperfect but earnest human hand produced the repunched mark, and the story of the extraordinary, against all odds chain of preservation that has kept this coin in perfect condition for over 80 years. The double die obverse variety of the 1944 wheat penny adds yet another layer of extraordinary collectability to this already deeply significant coin, and the finest known examples of this variety, where the doubling is bold and dramatic and immediately apparent to any trained eye, are among the most passionately pursued coins in the entire Lincoln Cent series. Coins whose appearance at auction generates excitement throughout the numismatic community, and whose final prices consistently surprise even experienced observers who thought they knew what to expect. The surface characteristics of a top-grade 1944 wheat penny reflect the unique metal composition of this wartime year. The shell casing brass gives these coins a slightly warmer, slightly more golden color tone than standard peacetime copper, a subtle difference that experienced collectors can often identify by eye alone. And that distinctive warmth of color on a coin in MS-68 red condition is something that professional graders describe in language usually reserved for works of fine art. using words like gorgeous and spectacular and breathtaking that seem hyperbolic until you actually see one of these coins under proper lighting and understand immediately why no other words will do. The strike quality of the finest 1944D wheat pennies reflects the Denver Mint's wartime production standards, which were in some respects more rigorous than the casual observer might expect, because the Mint understood that the coins it produced were not just economic tools, but symbols of American stability and confidence. And maintaining the quality of those symbols was itself a form of national service during a time when every aspect of American life was being organized around the single, overwhelming priority of winning the war. On the finest known examples, this commitment to quality is visible in every detail. Lincoln's portrait is razor sharp. The wheat stalks on the reverse show every individual grain with crystalline precision, and the overall impression of the coin is one of a masterpiece of industrial craft, a tiny object produced by a massive institution with the care and precision of something made by hand. The discovery stories of exceptional 1944D wheat pennies carry the emotional weight of the historical moment they come from, and they speak to the ongoing reality that these wartime coins, struck at a moment of national crisis and preserved through decades of subsequent history, are still being found in the most unexpected places by the most unexpected people. A collector in Colorado found a 1944D wheat penny of extraordinary quality in a military footlocker that had belonged to a veteran who had served in the Pacific Theater and returned home to store the locker in his garage, where it sat undisturbed for 50 years after his death until his grandchildren finally opened it and found, among the carefully preserved mementos of his service, a small tin of coins that included this magnificent penny, still blazing red with original mint luster as though it had been struck yesterday rather than in the darkest year of the most terrible war in human history. That story of a coin that survived a world war, preserved by a veteran who may never have known its monetary value but somehow understood its worth, is the 1944D wheat penny in its most human and most moving expression, and it reminds us that behind every great coin is a great human story, a chain of custody stretching back through decades of American life to the specific moment of creation, and that the weight of that human story is part of what makes these coins worth everything the market says they are worth and more. And now that you know the full, rich, deeply moving story of the 1944D wheat penny and the extraordinary value its finest examples command, we have arrived at the moment this entire video has been building toward from the very first second, the grand finale, the coin that caps everything we have explored today with a story so extraordinary, a rarity so absolute, and a significance so profound that it deserves every second of anticipation we have been building for it. So stay right here. Do not move, do not look away, because what is coming is the coin that is going to make everything else we have discussed today feel like the warm-up act for the most extraordinary numismatic story you have ever heard in your life. Next, the 1958 double die wheat penny. And yes, I know exactly what is going through your mind right now, because we discussed the 1958 wheat penny earlier in today's video, and you are sitting there wondering why we are returning to it now, at the very end, as our grand finale, as the coin that everything else has been building toward. And the answer to that question is the answer that is going to make this the most unforgettable moment of everything we have shared today, because the 1958 wheat penny that we discussed earlier and the 1958 double die wheat penny that we are about to explore right now are, in the most important numismatic sense, not the same coin at all. They are separated by a gulf of rarity and documented significance and collector passion, so enormous that placing them in the same category is like placing a beautiful sunset photograph and the Sistine Chapel ceiling in the same category simply because they are both visual experiences. The 1958 double die wheat penny, the specific, documented, exhaustively studied, legendarily rare variety that represents the absolute pinnacle of Lincoln wheat cent collecting, the coin that every serious Lincoln cent collector dreams of finding but that only a tiny handful of people in the entire world will ever hold in their hands, has been valued at $13 million for the finest known examples, and I need you to understand something absolutely crucial about the number before we go any further, because $13 million in the context of this specific coin represents something qualitatively different from $13 million attached to almost any other rare coin you can name. This is not $13 million because the coin is old, or because it is in excellent condition, or because it has a minor variety that specialists appreciate. This is $13 million because this coin is one of the most famous, most documented, most passionately pursued error coins in the entire history of American numismatics, a coin so well known within the collecting community that its name alone, 1958 double die, causes experienced collectors to lean forward involuntarily, a coin whose confirmed genuine population is so small that each known example is tracked individually by the specialists who study this series. A coin whose appearance at auction is treated as a genuine numismatic event, not just a sale. Let us go deep into the technical reality of what creates this coin, because understanding the specific, precise mechanism that produced the 1958 double die is essential to understanding why it is so extraordinarily rare, and why the numismatic community holds it in such reverent regard. The double die on a coin is not, as many people mistakenly believe, the result of a coin being struck twice by the dies. It is the result of the die itself receiving a doubled impression during its manufacture, meaning that every single coin struck from that die carries the same doubling, permanently and identically encoded in its surface. The process begins with the master hub, the original, hardened steel model of the coin's design from which all working dies are ultimately derived, being pressed into a die blank under enormous hydraulic pressure to transfer the design. Under normal circumstances, this hubbing process proceeds cleanly and without incident, and the resulting die carries a single, crisp, perfectly centered impression of the design that it will transfer to thousands of coins during its working life. But occasionally, rarely, under specific and difficult to predict conditions, the hubbing process goes wrong in a very specific way. The hub is pressed into the die blank with a slight rotational or linear misalignment, creating an impression that is fractionally off from where it should be. And then a corrective second hubbing is attempted that succeeds in adding a second strong impression to the die surface rather than erasing or overriding the first. The result is a die carrying two overlapping impressions of the design, shifted relative to each other by a precise and measurable amount, and every coin struck from that die will show that doubling, that ghostly, dramatic, immediately apparent doubling that makes the 1958 double die so visually unmistakable and so extraordinarily collectible. On the finest known examples of the 1958 double die wheat penny, the doubling is not subtle, not ambiguous, not the kind of thing you need specialized equipment or years of experience to detect. It is bold, it is dramatic, it is the kind of visual phenomenon that hits you immediately when you pick the coin up and turn it toward a strong light source, with Lincoln's date showing a clear, wide separation between primary and secondary impressions, with the inscriptions doubled in a way that gives the coin an almost three-dimensional quality, with Lincoln's portrait details showing that characteristic doubling that makes it look as though the great president's image is simultaneously trying to occupy two slightly different positions on the coin surface. Numismatists, who have had the privilege of handling confirmed genuine examples of the finest known 1958 double die pennies, describe the experience with a consistency that is itself telling. Almost universally, they reach for language that goes beyond the purely technical and into the realm of the aesthetic and even the spiritual, describing a coin that announces its own significance so powerfully and completely that no expertise is required to feel it, only eyes and the willingness to pay attention. One of the most celebrated dealers in American numismatics, a man who has handled more rare Lincoln cents than virtually anyone alive, said of the finest known 1958 double die that holding it felt like the numismatic equivalent of hearing a great symphony performed perfectly for the first time, an experience so complete, so overwhelming in its combination of technical excellence and aesthetic power, that it changed permanently the standard against which all subsequent experiences of the same kind would be measured. The authentication history of the 1958 double die wheat penny is itself a fascinating and somewhat dramatic story, because the coin's fame and extraordinary value have made it a target for counterfeiters, alterers, and wishful thinkers since the 1960s, and the grading services, particularly PCGS and NGC, have developed over the decades highly sophisticated, multi-layered authentication protocols specifically for evaluating 1958 double die submissions, because the stakes are so high and the potential for fraud so significant that ordinary examination procedures are simply not sufficient. These protocols involve examining not just the geometry and depth of the doubling itself, but the microscopic metal flow lines that surround each design element, the specific surface characteristics that distinguish a genuine hubbing error from a chemically or mechanically induced imitation, the precise measurements of the separation between primary and secondary impressions, and dozens of other technical parameters that require years of specialized study to fully understand and apply correctly. When a coin passes that rigorous authentication process and emerges certified as a genuine 1958 double die wheat penny in exceptional condition, it is a moment that reverberates through the entire numismatic community, because each confirmed genuine example is a singular, irreplaceable object. A coin whose entire existence from the moment the misaligned hub was pressed into its parent die in the Philadelphia Mint in 1958 to the moment it sits in its PCGS or NGC holder today is a story of extraordinary survival, extraordinary preservation, and extraordinary human recognition, and the $13 million value attached to the finest known examples is the market's way of acknowledging that story in the only language that markets know how to speak. The population of confirmed genuine 1958 double die wheat pennies is so small that numismatists track each known example individually, and the community's knowledge of these coins is intimate and specific in a way that is unusual even in a hobby defined by obsessive attention to detail. Each confirmed example has its own provenance, its own discovery story, its own history of ownership and exhibition and authentication, and the specialists who study this variety can discuss the individual characteristics of each known coin with the kind of detailed, personal familiarity that art historians bring to the study of individual masterworks, because that is exactly what these coins are: masterworks of accidental creation, objects whose significance derives not from intentional artistry but from the fortuitous convergence of mechanical error and extraordinary preservation that produce something genuinely, permanently, irreplaceably unique. The discovery stories of confirmed genuine 1958 double die examples are among the most celebrated in all of numismatics, and each one reinforces the fundamental truth that this channel exists to share, that extraordinary value hides in ordinary places, waiting with infinite patience for the person who has developed the knowledge and the attention to recognize it. Perhaps the most celebrated discovery story involves a collector who found his 1958 double die not at a major coin show or a prestigious auction, but in the most casually ordinary of all possible settings: a dealer's jump box at a small regional coin show, a cardboard box filled with common cents priced at a few cents each, the kind of box that experienced collectors have learned to scan quickly and efficiently because the probability of finding something significant is low but never zero. And it is that never zero probability that keeps sharp eyes moving through even the most seemingly unpromising material. This collector, a man who had spent decades studying Lincoln cents with the kind of systematic, encyclopedic thoroughness that only true devotion to a subject can produce, noticed something about a particular 1958 wheat penny in that jump box that made him pause, made him pick it up carefully by the edges, and hold it at an angle to the overhead fluorescent light. made him reach for the loop that every serious collector carries as instinctively as a carpenter carries a measuring tape. What he saw under that loop, the clear, dramatic, unmistakable doubling of the date and Lincoln's portrait that identified this coin as a genuine 1958 double die in extraordinary condition, was the culmination of decades of preparation meeting a single extraordinary moment of opportunity. And his subsequent submission of the coin to PCGS resulted in a certification that made headlines in the numismatic press and added a new chapter to the already legendary story of this variety. There is also the story of an estate sale in the Northeast, where a modest collection assembled by a careful but non-specialist collector over decades was sold off piece by piece, and where a sharp-eyed dealer examining the Lincoln cent folder found a 1958 wheat penny that the original collector had simply filed away without apparently recognizing its significance, a coin that, when examined under proper conditions and subsequently submitted for professional grading, proved to be one of the finest known genuine examples of the 1958 double die, a coin worth more than the entire estate it came from, waiting quietly in a cardboard folder for the day when someone with the right knowledge would finally look at it and understand what it was. And there is the story, perhaps the most moving of all, of a young collector, barely out of high school, who had saved up money from a summer job to buy a small collection of wheat pennies from a retiring collector in his town, a purchase he made more out of admiration for the older man's passion than from any specific expectation of finding something extraordinary. Among the coins in that collection was a 1958 wheat penny that the young collector noticed immediately for the unusual clarity of its doubling, a doubling so obvious and so dramatic that even his relatively limited experience was sufficient to recognize that he was looking at something that did not belong with ordinary coins. The journey that followed, the careful research, the consultation with more experienced collectors, the submission to a grading service, the nail-biting wait for the result, and the extraordinary moment when the certified coin came back as a genuine 1958 double die in exceptional condition, is the kind of story that the numismatic community tells and retells precisely because it captures everything that makes coin collecting not just a hobby, but a genuinely life-changing passion. As we close out today's extraordinary video, this deeply felt, richly detailed journey through 6 magnificent wheat pennies that has taken us from the San Francisco Mint in 1954 through the final glorious year of the wheat cent series in 1958, I want to leave you with something that I hope you carry with you long after you close this video and go back to your day. Something that the 1958 double die wheat penny embodies more completely than perhaps any other coin we have ever discussed on this channel. Something that is at once a practical truth and a philosophical one. The fortune you are looking for is not necessarily in a bank account or a stock portfolio or a piece of real estate. It might be in a coin, a tiny copper disc sitting in a junk box, or a cardboard folder, or an old mason jar, or a forgotten drawer in a house that has not been properly searched in decades, waiting with the patience of something that has already waited over 60 years for the person whose knowledge and attention will finally allow them to see it for what it truly is. The 1958 double die wheat penny is proof, absolute, documented, auction-confirmed proof, that a 1-cent coin can be worth $13 million, that a tiny piece of copper struck in an industrial mint in a single imperfect moment can carry within it a value that most people will never accumulate in a lifetime of work, and that the difference between finding the coin and walking past it is nothing more and nothing less than knowledge, the specific, detailed, hard-won, passionately pursued knowledge that this channel is dedicated to sharing with you every single time we publish a video. So check your coins. Check every wheat penny you come across. Check the old collections that are sitting in your family's home without having been properly examined. Check the jar of change on your dresser, the cigar box in your grandfather's closet, the cardboard folder in the attic that nobody has opened since the 1970s. Because the next great discovery story in the world of rare Lincoln cents could have your name attached to it, And the coin at the center of that story could be sitting right now in a place that is no more than a few steps away from where you are sitting watching this video. Thank you from the absolute bottom of our hearts for watching the Coins Explorer all the way to the very last second of today's video. Your time, your attention, your passion for this extraordinary world of rare coins and the human stories they carry means everything to us. And if today's journey has given you even one new reason to look more carefully at the coins in your life, then we have done exactly, perfectly, completely what we set out to do. Please like this video if it gave you chills. Share it with everyone in your life who loves history or treasure hunting or the idea that extraordinary things can hide in ordinary places. Subscribe to the Coins Explorer so you are the first to know every time we publish another deep dive into the world of rare and valuable coins. And drop a comment below right now telling us which coin from today's video surprised you the most, and whether you are going to go check your old coin collection. Tonight, because we read every single comment, we value every single voice in this community, and the community of coin explorers that we are building together here on this channel is, without any question or hesitation, the greatest treasure of all.